Good morning from the campus of the United States Sports Academy in Daphne, Alabama. This is Sports Talk, a presentation of the Sports Academy focusing on contemporary issues in the world of sport. I'm Dr. Arthur Ogden, Chair of Sports Management, and I serve as the moderator for Sports Talk. Each Wednesday at this time, we discuss hot topics of interest in sport, and the Academy now are always here to assist us. This morning, we're going to talk about the Army, the military, and how they have changed the structure of physical training through eliminating sport. Let me introduce the panel today. To my right and your left is Ms. Tanya Butler-Collins. She's a doctoral teaching assistant who is an Army veteran. And to my left is Mr. Corey Sherville, also a doctoral teaching assistant who has done a great deal of study in this field. One of the things that I discovered when talking about this with Mr. Sherville is that sport on the military bases, particularly in the Army, is being eliminated from the physical training program. General Ray Odierno, those of you who may have known him, who was the Army Chief of Staff during Desert Storm, has said personal injury due to on and off duty physical training or sports related activities continues to be one of our top injury producing activities, quotes closed. The injury rate from 2008 to 2009 continued to increase even after the directive to not allow sports during physical training hours. But in 2010, 48% reduction in these types of injuries was noted. And it was also noted that almost 34% of medical evacuations from Iraq during Desert Storm were due to non-battle injury, some trauma, some sports, and some overuse. So we take a look at some basic questions. First of all, Corey.
Yes, sir.
What was the motivation for the military to make this move, particularly the Army?
The motivation, number one, for the Army standpoint would be to decrease injuries and ultimately the dollar amounts that are associated with that. Another major component of it was to increase the training specificity, so training for their warrior task and battle drills in combat as opposed to playing basketball and soccer to prepare for possible combat situations. And even their non-combat duty days, just every day is very strenuous. They need to be executing some kind of program that prepares them for these activities, and sports doesn't necessarily cover all aspects that need to do that.
Good. Tanya, you were in the military and you were a participant in military sports. Tell us a bit about that experience, what sports you were involved in, how it was organized, and I don't know if this is going to have any implications, although we talked off camera about some of the military base sports they have.
Well, first off, I played softball and volleyball while I was in the military, and I also was on bowling and rifle leagues while I was there. During that time, we only maybe one day a week used sports as part of our PT, and I have a very different perspective on the implications of sport with PT. But most of the time, our PT was very structured, our physical training was very structured as to make sure that we were able to pass our physical fitness readiness tests as well as be combat ready at any time, which was the general mission of every soldier despite your MOS or your job classification. But there's so much more to sports, as we know from an academic perspective as well as those who participate, is, sports do prepare you for combat in different ways. They break down the individual and they make you look at playing as a team. Because if you go into war and you look at, being an individual in there, you cannot fight war as one person. You have to be a team. Good.
That makes a lot of sense. In this approach, and I know you've done quite a bit of study on this, is this really, really a good strategic move for the military?
I believe yes. The higher ups in the military, what they did was brought together seasoned veterans, physical therapists, doctors. They analyzed the warrior task battle drills and physical components that make up soldiering, and came up with a comprehensive system, which is FM 7-22 that is this program, they don't, honestly, they understand the implications of positive sport participation and everything that comes out of it. It's not saying that you can't play, you know, in the Army Rec League or something like that, but for the hours in PT in the morning, you have to make sure, in Army terms and layman's terms, that you are squared away and good to go as far as a physical aspect, and then you can move on to do the things that are inherently risky but have been mitigated by the proper performance training.
Yeah, and Tanya, you had mentioned that the team sports build what you want in different units, but the PT that was implied through sport really didn't achieve what PT wanted. Would you expand on that, please?
I'm not
The
exactly.
specificity of the PT?
As far as, well, when we do PT, what we're looking at is, as a master fitness trainer, our job was to make sure that the body was completely physically fit, aerobically, anaerobically. You know, we were strong enough to do our job. We were able to, if we had to, you know, hump our packs 25 miles, we were able to do that. But not in an hour's time that was designated for our physical fitness. You couldn't always do that. And you needed more variety in that, and doing the same thing every day, because at the time that I was in, not every unit was assigned a master fitness trainer. So sometimes it was up to whoever was in charge of running physical training at that time. So there were issues with overtraining syndromes.
Does this relate in any way to say what we have outside of the military and cross training?
Yes, it does relate. I mean, being in the fitness field, we have issues with a lot of different types of training programs not having proper guidance and not having regulation within our field, especially with personal trainers. And then we have issues with programs like CrossFit that are advertised for a general population, for firefighters, for public service, but they're not well guided and run by trained individuals. So we have the same, if not more, implications to injury, and then we have a higher percentage of injury. So all of these are being brought into the military.
And Corey, you found some interesting statistics in this area.
Yes, I think it's also important to note that when Tanya was serving, they did have more emphasis on structured PT. Since the surge, for the Iraqi war and all of that, they kind of, for lack of better words, got a little lax on the standardized PT because they needed soldiers to fight, and they kind of started focusing on other things. And then now it's been, a decade, and they're starting to see the implications and the outcomes of neglecting this important area. But it's the same as, you can see a cross correlation with other sports. Professional players and contracts in high-level leagues, if you roll your ankle jumping on a trampoline, when you're getting paid $10 million on a contract, there's something in the contract that says, well, why were you doing that? You should be devoting everything to your employment. The same thing applies for soldiers.
Yeah, I was also wondering for both of you, it's kind of a little bit off the wall, but that's typical here. Many of our troops that fought in Desert Storm and in Iraq were National Guard units. Now, I know that by the book that if you're in the Guard, you're supposed to keep the same type of PT. Did you find in your studies or your personal experiences any difference? And I'm not trying to attack the Guard, but I realize that they're there every once a month or twice a month or something like that. How can we expect them to keep up their PT?
Ready to go first, Sonia?
Yes, because I served in 2 years in a reserve component as well. And knowing that we only meet once a month, and that's our only structured or designated time that we do anything, it is also implied by a contractual obligation that it is your job to maintain physical standards, to be physically ready and fit to fight at any time that you are called up. And depending on the type of unit you're in, we had different tiers for deployment, then the expectations were higher. So that is personal responsibility and a contractual obligation.
As opposed to being active when their schedule is structured.
Right.
Yeah, if I could caveat, we would have some Guard people, or some Guard soldiers in our course. I was part of a contracting team that taught the new FM to active soldiers, And every once in a while we get a guard component, and they would go back and say, you know, how am I supposed to teach this whole FM and field manual in a day or a weekend to people that don't know anything about it? But the Army has taken a holistic approach. They've made an app with training videos, schedules already made, every single thing you could ever want to know about it. They spent a lot of money and time on something they think is very valuable. But yes, it is definitely harder to approach it from a reserve standpoint.
And the only reason I asked that is because we had so many reserve troops fighting those wars, and still do, even though and on top of the fact that we are an all-voluntary military. Well, so what we can deduce from this then is that sport as a major component of military, at least the Army, PT, physical training, is not at the premium that it used to be. I have a question for both of you, and just toss up or toss out the puck and see who hits it first. What overall implications do we see this to have for sport outside of the military?
Do you talk about the correlation
Well,
between people coming into the Army?
yeah, I think it goes both ways, both coming in and leaving, because I think part of it is the structure in which we have moved to in our coaching of sports coming up. Everybody gets trophies, no one wins, no one loses. And so we've taken out the competitive edge there, which if we look at ancient times when sports were originally formulated, they were put together to prepare for war, and they were designed to create warriors. And so play and sports were to mimic activities of war. So the competitive nature was one to win. And we've taken a lot of that out. We've also taken a lot of the physical conditioning. So now we have issues with not having physically fit individuals coming into the military, which raises the implications for injuries even higher. Mm-hmm. And so when we have a large majority of our individual or recruits coming in and being sent home within the first year after basic training, after their advanced and individual training because of injury or use, most of that is directly related to the way that they were trained coming up, whether they played sports or not, their weight, obesity issues, nutrition implications, and then leaving the military. I mean, it all depends on how long they served and what they did as far as the implications coming back into sport.
Right, and I think that's important to make some really good points. And we all know that physical education has been de-emphasized in many school districts throughout the country. Corey?
Yes, I totally agree with what Tanya said. That everyone coming in is at a lower level, so the Army had to be able to make a program for 1.1 million soldiers that will train to the lowest and train to the highest and have a full spectrum in between that. And then as far as the competitiveness aspect, they do still incorporate combatives, obstacle courses. There are some competitive natured aspects, but as far as sport and a lot of the external and intrinsic aspects of sport, they are neglected to a degree, but they try to walk the balance with appropriate safety requirements and then also developing them competitively. Okay,
so is it fair to say that while sport, as you were mentioning before, develops teamwork and perhaps exploits the unity of a combat unit, how does the PT train or enhance the warrior readiness from a standpoint of being mentally ready? Obviously, physically ready, we're going to make certain that we're lean, mean fighting machines, but a lot of that comes from within. You know the phrase, you win from within. How do we deal with that now?
That would come into play with a lot of the combatives training and the obstacle courses and the warrior task and battle drill development, reacting to fire drills, things like that. A lot of it is not going to be trained by the physical aspect of it. That's very true. And sports is missing that as well. But okay, keep in mind, a lot of this stuff is sadly being driven by dollar amounts and only preventing injuries. So they can't get as a holistic approach as they want because their resources are somewhat limited.
But I have an issue with that because those are all individualized, and we're still, the Army catered to, the voice of society, and that's why they became the army of one, because we've developed, a new generation of narcissistic individuals that only think of themselves. And sports has eliminated that, because if you play as a sole participant in a team sport, you will lose. And so sports has taught people that you have to rely on each other, that you have to work together, and you have to work cohesively in order to accomplish the task of, whether it's winning, which is mostly what we're striving for, as well as all the other parts of it. But that's the whole reason that we do boot camp together, and you're only as strong as your weakest link, is what we always talk about. We start together, we finish together, we play together, we work as a team, because we know that, especially American soldiers, we will never leave anyone behind. But if we keep promoting the individual and we work only on the individual level, we will never have that mentality that you matter more than I do, and that you represent not just yourself, but everyone within this country. And it gives us value as to why we fight and why we continue to want to preserve the rights of you, and why we're willing to die for that.
Okay, so is it fair to say that her points, very well taken, are more emphasized in a practical application in participation in sport, but the PT now is focusing on, shall we say, making certain that the engine is tuned well, that the tires are all in good shape, that the engine is oiled and so forth, but sport actually puts the driver behind the wheel. Is that a fair enough analogy? Because I agree with everything that Tanya has said, and I'm very, very impressed with the research that you've done. I don't know about you, we could have gone here for a couple of hours, but and this is a very interesting and far-reaching type of study that has implications as a result of what's going on in some of our education and recreation institutions. So I want to thank you all for tuning in today. I want to thank Tanya and thank Corey. They are two fine examples of the type of graduate teaching assistants we get here in the doctoral program, and they've been doing an outstanding job. I also want to thank you folks who've been sending in your email suggestions to Sports Talk. Don't stop that. Send them in to sportstalk@usssa.edu. And so for Tanya and Corey, this is Dr. Arthur Ogden saying, have a great day in sport, and we'll see you next week.